in the room, you don't need to do it on the computer. So we'll treat it as per a normal meeting on that basis. Again, we'll have the normal proposer and seconder of a resolution. We'll then vote on that proposal for those who've been present in the room throughout, and we'll then announce what the result of that vote is. I'll also just introduce to you, to my right, our officers from the Democratic Services and our legal section. To our left are officers from our planning service who will be outlining and giving us the details of the application. And as I mentioned, there are members of the public and other members of council present online who will be able to view what is taking place today. If we move then, please, to our agenda, I think the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. And Mrs Nicholson, are there any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Bolt.
Councillor Evans. That's a good question. What do you want to do? Good point. Thank you very much.
It's been filmed.
Yeah, we have got a camera operating at the rear, so those who are watching online can see certainly the top table. I think if members wish to turn on their cameras. I can't see anything. We hopefully will have a camera, in which case I'm glad you pointed that out. So yes, I would suggest then at the moment, if members are prepared to do that, I think it would be helpful if you come to speak, if you can turn your camera on, but then remember that the microphone that you need to use is the one that is the handheld microphone that is being passed around, not the one on your laptop. Otherwise, we'll get horrendous feedback. So thank you for that, Bill. Right. I've not been advised of any urgent business today that isn't already on our agenda. So for public speaking time, again, for members of the public, for those of you who are with us virtually today, as I mentioned earlier, each application will be taken in turn. The officers will give the background of that application, and then we will ask you to turn on your microphone. You will have 3 minutes to address the committee. We will give you a 1-minute warning. I'll interject just to say you've got 1 minute left to go, so that you know you've got that time. And if you can draw your comments to a conclusion within that 3 minutes, that would be very helpful. If we move on to then declarations of interest, are there any declarations from members today? We'll start with Councillor Scott. Hold on, you need to wait for the mic. And again, Liz, if you'd like to turn your camera on.
Oh, I don't know how to do that.
That's okay. All right, stick with the mic.
Yeah, sorry. For clarification, we own a piece, or the person whose application, this first application, owns a piece of land next to our farm. So should I declare an interest?
Yes.
Hold on, Dawn.
Scott. Sorry.
If you could come a little closer, sorry.
Councillor Scott, I would recommend that you declare a DPI. So you can't stay in the room when the item comes on, so you will have to go out. Thank you.
So I'll do that, thank you.
So just to confirm, that's a pecuniary interest on the application on page 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also I'm the ward member for this application and another application.
And the
in Contribution.
Ward members, no interest. Yeah. Interest.
Yeah.
So that's the other application. Is that the one on page 40?
Yeah.
Okay. But that's a non-predetermination. So part of she's not taken.
Can you just clarify the ward members, because people are getting confused. Councillor Scott, if you're a member of the parish council or the town council, then it would be a non-predetermination declaration, but because you're a ward member, that doesn't come under interest under the code.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Evans.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. On page 89, I am a town councillor of Pleasanton, and so, but I've taken no part in any discussion on the application regarding Scrumpy Barn. However, I do like Scrumpy, if that's a declaration of interest.
Okay, thank you. And just to confirm, that one we'll be taking in the afternoon, so we'll probably need you to declare that same interest this afternoon as well. Any other decorations? I've got two to do. One is on page 17 and one is on page 40. Rather like Councillor Scott, I am the County Council divisional member for that area. I do attend the parish council meetings, but leave the room when they come to planning applications. So I've taken no part in the discussions at that level. I'm not seeing any other decorations. So in which case we'll move to the planning applications themselves. The first application we're going to take is the application which is on page 17. It's the parish of Badgeworth, and it's Mr. Titchener. I think you're going to introduce this one, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully everyone can hear me and everyone can see the presentation. Okay. So the application is for the change of use of land from an equestrian arena to caravan and vehicle storage. It's located at Bow Farm, Badgeworth, just off the A38. Just to orient ourselves, it is the arrow pointing to, you can see it, sort of see the line of the A38 sort of heading in a sort of northeast direction. So it's just located on the north side of that, on the approach towards Lower Weir and Cross beyond. The yellow arrow here points to the area at the rear of the site. So I'll show the red line plan in a second. Essentially, it's a plot that's located out the back of those buildings on the north side. So it's located about 100 metres to the north of the A38 by an existing track that runs through the site out towards the back. So predominantly the site is that slightly triangular, almost pointy bit of land that sort of includes the rectangular arena and the sort of green area sort of immediately wrapping around its north, east and west sides. You can see here, you should be able to make out the blue line is the owned land, the red line is the land subject to the application. So you can see at the top part, it wrapping around that rectangular area. And then there's a very narrow channel which leads in a southerly direction back to the A38, which is the access track and the point of access onto the highway network. It may be slightly difficult to see the outlines on these plans. They're not, it is quite tricky. Essentially, these are just zoomed in versions of the block plan. The one on the left showing the track, it comes up between the buildings that are located close to the access, and I'll talk about those buildings to those relevant shortly, leading through the site, and then the storage area is the area to the rear. This is a proposed plan, essentially the same as the previous plan, but just with the denotation about the access to the site. It shows some waiting areas on the further in and passing places. Just in terms of what the proposal is, so we'd see this former equestrian site north of the A38. So the use of that would be changed so it could be used for the storage of caravans and vehicles. Now, there was a reconsultation exercise going on at the point that the committee report was finalised on this application. That was largely a technical reconsultation. The only change to the scheme was that it became clear during the latter part of the determination of this application that there was a small area of land within the red line of the application which was unregistered land, so not in the control of the applicant. They had to therefore amend the application form to confirm that they didn't own all of it under what's called Certificate D. They have to do a newspaper notice, and then we had to do a reconsultation. That exercise is finished. It's largely technical, just to make sure that a lawful planning permission could be issued at the end of it. It doesn't materially change the scheme in any way, and no other responses were received during that consultation. The Parish Council did update their response, though largely reiterating the points that they'd already previously put forward in their earlier responses. But nonetheless, I'll just go through the points that were received in the parish's most recent comments because they weren't set out in the report. So they highlighted concerns about traffic impact, but they said they were awaiting the highways response, and I will update on that shortly. They felt there was insufficient information on the number and volume of vehicle movements, concern about amenity impacts on existing residents, lack of information on hours of use, security, potential for the use of the area for airport parking, They felt the scale and use was inappropriate for the location, concerned about the enforceability of movements to and from the site, flood risk and contamination, overlooking of properties, security of properties, lighting controls. So I'll come to those issues as I move through the report, and I'll also touch on the final comments of the Highway Authority. So just some photos. So this is the point of access between the property. So the property on the left-hand side is within the applicant's ownership, and then there are two properties on the right-hand side which are in third-party ownership. This is the existing access on the A38, which served the equestrian use that was operational on the site, I believe known as Mendip Stud, and it operated until about 3 years ago. So vehicles accessing the site would have been able to do so through here, through the track between the properties. You can see from this a street view image just taken on the A38 that this is coming out onto a very straight section of the A38 where there is quite long visibility in the southwesterly direction there, and again very long visibility in the opposite direction. So in terms of visibility, it actually offers a very acceptable level of visibility in both directions. And then these photos just take us further deep into the site. So the picture on the top right, sort of deep within the site, looking back along the track that vehicles would travel along, having passed the properties at the point of access, and then coming into the site. And then the bottom photo in the bottom left again to show a bit of context of those buildings, sort of looking across part of the site, part of it sort of scruffy ground at the moment. And then these next two are part of the land where the vehicles would be stored, so sort of taken. So it's a flat piece of land. The bottom left picture sort of stood at the top end, looking back towards those buildings. So they sort of form the backdrop against which these vehicles would be stored. The picture in the top right sort of stood with the buildings behind you, looking further north, and you can see the landscape's flat, and there's an existing landscape boundary along sort of the north edge. You can sort of make out sort of hedgerow and some trees, but you will note that you can see the Mendip Hills in the background, so it's quite flat for about a mile beyond the boundaries of the site, and then you've got the very sort of steeply rising land of the Mendip Hills beyond, and you can see sort of Crook Peak, and that's very much part of the considerations of this application in terms of, you know, are there likely to be landscape impacts when viewed to and from the Mendip Hills A, and B, and that's something that we had to consider as part of the proposal. And again, lastly, just a couple more photos within the site. You can kind of see the perimeter of the former riding arena, slightly overgrown now. Those fences would go, but the existing vegetative boundaries would remain to form the enclosures of the site. So in terms of the principle, we are in a countryside location as set down in the local plan. The nearest sort of settlements would be Badgeworth, Lower Weir, Biddisham, within a sort of relatively short distance, but the site itself is countryside. It's off the A38. Members will know, I mean, there's sort of quite sporadic built form along large parts of the A38. Lots of that built form largely falls outside of development limits. The proposal would reuse an existing horse riding facility that has ceased operation. So in terms of policies, CO3 sets context for rural brownfield sites, and it talks about the reuse, remodelling of such sites can be supported, but where it's appropriate, and the things to consider in terms of whether it's appropriate are scale and character, and that it should not result in significant adverse impacts, whether highway impacts, landscape, for example. So in principle, we're talking about swapping one commercial activity, the equestrian centre, for a new facility, vehicle storage. So principle of such changes is acceptable. Obviously, we need to look at the specific impacts. So in terms of visual landscape impacts, it's relevant policies in the local plan D2 and D19 set the context in terms of assessing design, in terms of assessing impacts on areas of outstanding natural beauty. So it's on the north side of the A38, and as I said, there's an existing group of dwellings at the point of access, and there are those large former equestrian buildings behind them. So there is existing built form within the locality set on the southern side, and on the northern side it's bounded by quite mature planting, trees and hedgerows. As I've stated, the A and B is what are the main considerations here in terms of what does it mean in terms of visual landscape impacts. And one of the considerations that we had to look at as part of the application was that when you tend to have large areas of caravans parked together, they tend to be very white in colour, and actually is that seen from a distance going to give rise to visual harm? The white colouring tends to be potentially more noticeable, so that needed careful consideration. So we didn't generally feel that inward views from short distances were going to be significant. It's got a very long track from the site. It's unlikely to be seen from vehicles passing the A38. They're unlikely to be able to see the caravans. So that's unlikely to cause harm. It's more the issue that we felt that needed to be assessed was, could it be seen from the AONB and potentially elevated points within the AONB? So because of that, we sought the views of our landscape officer and who did a site visit, and she visited some elevated points within the AONB. So she noted in her comments that it wasn't a designated landscape where the site itself is located, and she felt it to be well screened. She said it may be possible to see it from within the AONB, but it'd be likely to be no more prominent than the existing buildings at the site. She did acknowledge that the roofs of caravans may be seen above vegetation, but would be glimpsed and partial due to the distance and extent of vegetation. So he didn't consider that storage would significantly affect the enjoyment of anyone within the AONB, for example, walking within the AONB and enjoying the AONB. I've got one photo. It's not the clearest, I have to say. This is taken from a vantage point up in the AONB. So if you drive along the Webington Road, there's a sort of pull-in where you can get sort of half a dozen sort of cars. It's one of the sort of more obvious vantage points, but quite elevated looking back. And you can just see, just on the brow in the middle, sort of a white area where some of the buildings are located. And it kind of gives you a sense of actually, when you're up there, the distance to the actual proposal. And the building would be located, the proposal storage area would be located just to the fore of those buildings, but still set back at quite some distance and with quite heavily vegetated boundaries in between it. So that's kind of what informed her views. So her ultimate recommendations in terms of looking at landscape impacts were that she felt that some additional tree planting in that triangular area at the very north of the plot could help provide some additional screening, and a bit of screening with a little bit of height. But she didn't feel that it would lead to significant adverse impacts. And the other element that we'd also want to control is sort of lighting, as to minimise any wider landscape harm. And I have to admit, landscape was one of those things that I was really concerned about when we got the application. It was only once we sent the landscape officer out and had her detailed assessment that I felt a bit more comfortable with the proposal. And then we just move on to some of the other areas that are particularly relevant to highways impacts. So it's got an access onto the A38. When the application was first submitted, and you might see reference to this in the report, that was not the point of access that was being proposed. There was a different point of access further along the A38. People might be aware that there's an existing lay-by. If you drive further along the A38, we often have like a burger van or that type of thing parked there, and lorries tend to park, and they wanted to have that as their point of access. That's been changed. Their red line wasn't actually able to connect to that point of access. The Highway Authority had concerns about emerging at that point, so that point of access wasn't particularly feasible and was removed from the application. So that's why we reverted to the point of access between the existing properties on the A38. So that access that we are talking about serves 3 dwellings and the previous equestrian centre. So the proposal would see the site only visited on an appointment-only basis, but the Highways Authority felt that they needed further clarification so they could make a full assessment. And we have now had the final comments of the Highway Authority since the report was prepared. They aren't raising an objection. They consider the existing access is of a suitable width, and they consider it to be a suitable means of access. They've had access to things like trip numbers, for example, previously, and tracking plans to show that vehicles could be turned within the site appropriately. And on the basis of that, they felt that they would not be raising objection. They would want conditions to be secured so that those turning areas were kept free of obstruction. Obviously, the turning area with a caravan would be relatively large. Some concern has been expressed by the Parish Council about the potential for airport parking. I mean, the applicant has been quite clear that they said it's not for airport parking. Any kind of car parking they're talking about, they said was more likely to be about for classic cars. I mean, airport parking isn't a specific sort of planning use, so it presented some difficulties for us in terms of how we might preclude airport parking at the site. In discussions with the applicant and the Highway Authority, the way that's been proposed to be done, because actually car parking is a very small element of the overall mix in terms of what the applicant was seeking. Primarily it's for caravans. So the plan that you'll see has within it a small area marked car storage location denoted with within a coloured rectangle. So there is a condition proposed on the permission to limit the parking of cars to a max of 15 and only to within that designated area. Now, that's a slightly roundabout way to get at precluding airport parking on the site, but given that airport parking isn't a specific use, this seemed to be the most proportionate way to do it, to overall limit the numbers, and bearing in mind that that's not what the applicant says they intend to use the site for anyway. So ultimately, with the lack of objection of the Highway Authority and with the conditions proposed, it is overall considered acceptable on highway grounds. And just finally, just to touch on other few matters. So in terms of the amenity impacts, caravans are stored about 100 metres from the nearest properties. The actual storage of them, we do not consider would give rise to particular amenity impacts, but the movement of vehicles to and through the access is the bit that happens in more closer proximity to the neighbouring properties. So it could have the potential to harm residential amenity, notwithstanding the fact that the previous equestrian use would have meant vehicles would have moved to and through that access. But so what we propose to do is put an hours of operation condition on it to remove some of the most unsociable hours in which vehicles would move. So just to limit it mainly to sort of daytime and very early evening type activities. And with that, we don't consider that the impact would be any more significant than the previous use. In terms of ecology, there are some conditions proposed to control external lighting and to install biodiversity enhancements. And finally, I just want to touch on public sector equality duty, because this is something that's come up on other applications where the loss of facilities has been proposed. The report sets out our duties under the Equality Act in terms of decisions and how they might affect the groups with protected characteristics as defined under the Act. It's a loss of a facility. It could be used by the community. When it was open, we don't consider it would be used by any particular groups, any particular characteristic, and those characteristics, things like sort of race, age, for example. So we don't feel it would have had any specific group. There are other similar facilities open in the area, so it's not considered in discharging duty that the loss would specifically impact on any one group as defined under that Act. So just to summarise, it does reuse an existing commercial site. There's no other issues which cannot be addressed by conditions in our view. We suggest that the reason, so the lighting condition I've mentioned, just the reason underneath it in the report is set out for ecology purposes only, and actually it has more functions than just ecology. It's more of amenity and visual impact purpose as well. So I'd suggest just amending the wording for the reason for the condition in the eventuality that permission is granted. Overall, we are recommending permission is granted. Thank you very much.
We have a couple of speakers. You can hear me? Okay. As you'll see, we've got a couple of speakers on this application. We'll take those in turn. The first is Jackie Hitwell. What we'll do, Jackie, if we can, is we'll ask you to enable your microphone, and then if you can count for say 5 seconds just before you start, because that will give us time to switch over the microphones and the speakers so that we're with you rather than in the room. So if you start your count now, and we'll do the switch over so that you can address us. Just remind you, you've got 3 minutes.
Good morning. I'm Jackie Hitwell from Blackmore Parish Council, and I've got to state a short statement. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
This is a short statement from, my name is Jackie Hitwell. I'm a member of the Blackmore Parish Council, and this is a short statement in support of our objection. Policy CO3 sets the context for redevelopment of rural brownfield sites Proposals for the reuse or remodelling of existing rural brownfield sites for employment uses will be supported where it remains of an appropriate scale and character and does not result in significant adverse impacts. The existing uses in question centre, whilst not agriculture, is appropriate in terms of use in the countryside and visual impact and traffic generation. Large-scale storage and parking is not appropriate in this isolated rural area. Large-scale storage and parking would also be contrary to policy D2, as it would not positively respond to the character and identity of the area, which in this case is mostly farmland. The proposal should be sited in a more sustainable location in accord with local plan policy D15, which states that large-scale proposals should be focused at the larger settlements. Adverse impacts. There will be significant adverse impacts to the residents of the access to the site in terms of visual amenity and noise and the traffic and commercial use, overlooking from vehicles entering and leaving the site and traffic emissions from vehicles. Members who are not familiar with the site should understand that these homes are clustered closely around the access. Amenity Impact Policy D25 states that the proposals which unacceptably impact on the residential amenity of existing residents will not be supported. The lack of information on the number of volume of vehicles proposed for storage at the site and the likely number of movements generated by the proposed use, which would include additional vehicles required to transport owners of vehicles stored at the site, means that the transport impacts cannot be measured or regulation considered, particularly in terms of policy D14, managing the transport impact of development and the impacts on residents on the A38. This location does not have access to regular public transport. Such large-scale storage, if permitted, would surely require lighting and management presence at the site. Car and vehicle alarms could also be a problem with the scale of the parking proposed. The measures proposed to regulate the arrival and departure of vehicles requires management. Gates would need to be closed and locked. In fact, there is a lack of information regarding any proposed lighting and security at the site, including such things as fencing and any measures to mitigate these impacts. The impact of light pollution in this rural dark skies area is a concern and should be carefully controlled. I recognise that that has already been dealt with in your officer's report. In fact, security and lighting measures could be added as an amendment if the application were permitted, but are significant impacts that could be considered as part of such an application as a whole.
I'll have all the time on there, though. Thank you very much. And again, can I apologise for the technical issues we've had this morning?
Okay, no problems.
We have a second speaker on this application, which is Alex Sebinger, who's the agent. Alex, again, if I can ask you to enable your microphone, and again, if you can count yourself in, and we can just make sure that we've got you, we can hear you in the room. But start your 3 minutes, and we'll give you the 1 minute warning when there's a minute left to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. At the outset, on behalf of my client, I would like to thank your officers for their assistance in working with us in order to achieve the positive recommendation before you today for this application. As set out in the suggested condition number 8 of your officer's report on page 27, the use is to be specifically for caravans, motorhomes, trailers, horse boxes and up to 15 cars. Cars are to be located in a specifically defined area of the site as you have been shown. The site lies within the countryside and is classed as rural brownfield. Consequently, policy CO3 applies where reuse of existing sites for employment uses is acceptable, providing no undue impacts arise. It is noted that the view of the Council's landscape officer have been sought, and in their professional opinion, they state that the proposed storage use will have no more prominence from the nearby AONB than the site at present, and a landscaping condition would ensure that the use blends in appropriately to the landscape. My client agrees to this condition and will work with the Council's officers to provide an appropriate landscaping scheme. There are no highway concerns with this proposal, this having been clarified in their most recent response by the Highways section on the 21st of October. The appointments-based system for arrivals and departures is acceptable here, as it has been found on other sites granted for permission for storage use within Sedgemoor. Visibility at the entrance and turning within the site is also acceptable to the Highway Authority. It is set out in your officer's report that the amenities of neighbouring properties will be unharmed with this proposal. The imposition of suggested condition 6 concerning the hours of use, 7 AM until 8 PM Monday to Friday and 9 AM until 6 PM other times, will ensure that this remains the case, and that any impacts would be unlikely to be majorly different from those arising when the site operated as an equestrian centre. It is acknowledged that the Parish Council has concerns over this proposal, and I would respectfully suggest that the contents of your officer's report and their presentation addresses all of these. I note there is concern regarding the use of the site for airport parking. However, this is not a subject which has been put forward as part of this application. In any case, suggested condition 8, which restricts the use of the site to 15 cars in a defined area, ensures that this matter is addressed. To conclude, this proposal seeks for a change of use to this existing brownfield site that is acceptable in principle, will not cause visual harm, will not affect highway safety, and will not affect neighbouring amenity. I would like to thank committee for your time and hope that you find yourselves able to agree with the recommendation of your officer and grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And hopefully you can, just to confirm everyone can hear. Great, thank you very much. Right, members, any comments or questions, please? We'll start with Councillor Kingham. You're not, could you start again, just? No.
Am I on?
It is now.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank
sir.
you. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's always good to see something being reused once a business is finished. Storing caravans, I mean, how will they be stored in number? I mean, if you go to other storage places, the caravans are put in about 100 metres apart, and they're just like one big block of white, and then they have security lights, and it looks very urban. Not sort of thing that you want to see in the countryside. So do we know the number of caravans and how they be stored? Landscaping, obviously, I know you did mention landscaping, but obviously landscaping around this area, because it is very flat and open, and it would obviously need some sort of landscaping to sort of make the amenity look far more attractive when you're from a distance. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Titchener.
In terms of the overall numbers, the plans that we've got in terms of showing a layout, which is the one I've shown, so there aren't any other plans. They've estimated that the number of caravans would be no more than 100 at the most. So in terms of accommodating those into the landscape, obviously the landscape officers recommended a landscaping condition, and trees were one of the things she wanted as that, but give some of the landscaping a bit of height above the existing boundaries, which aren't low at the moment, but it would certainly go up. And in terms of lighting, there is that condition there that we'd want to control lighting to be at its absolute minimum. We are talking about a rural area, so the lighting condition has that sort of dual purpose of, they want it minimal because they don't want to impact on bats, but they also want it minimal because actually we don't want this site to be, you know, lit up at night time. So there is that balance there in terms of that having that dual purpose, because ultimately we accept where it is, but it's about, it can be accommodated with the backdrop of those existing buildings and just minimising its impact.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I've got Councillor Hendry and then Councillor Revens.
Is it on?
Yes, it is.
I looked through all the notes on this at some length because it's quite controversial. The Parish Council, they've got points too, which have to be listened to. They are local. However, moving on from that just for one moment, these places, a question, whatever the case is, they have to be allowed to be diverse. If something doesn't generate an income for whatever reason that may be, they have to be looked at sympathetically. They have to be allowed to move forward. Landscaping schemes by the applicant have said yes, they can be put in place. One of the things from the Parish Council I noticed, because they said there were a lot of things they weren't happy about, but some things haven't been ratified anyway. But one of them, for example, was the car alarm problem. I don't actually hold with that at all, because if you have a town centre car park really in villages, towns, whatever the case is, but a town centre predominantly. If car alarms go off, which they do regular, nobody can really do anything about it, because if they can't locate the owner of the car, and they don't really go off for that long anyway, it's probably 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes. So things like that really shouldn't be taken into play here. The highways, ecology, Natural England, landscape officer, everybody seems to be on board without too much headache in this. The AONB doesn't seem to be much of a problem either. The landscape officer hasn't highlighted anything or flagged up anything that should be taken into consideration of any substance. The applicant said they'll do screen tree planting to help. It's not essential, but yes, it would help. It would be a good thing to go by, and the point of access has been changed from the lay-by, so they are trying to put everything in place to pacify everybody. Generally speaking, I'm actually okay with this at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Evans. No. No.
Thank you. Sorry, I was switched off. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's looking at the policy CO3. We can see that brownfield sites can be redeveloped for purposes such as this, so long as the impact is not substantial. And I would urge members to look at the feedback from the two neighbouring properties at Scooters End and Mendip Croft at the impact that the caravans will have going down this extremely narrow lane on the amenity of their properties, thinking particularly policy D25. And I would urge members to think very carefully about how that can be mitigated. And if it can't be mitigated, then is this application policy compliant? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. Can you hear? Yeah, Councillor Evans has picked up the point I wanted to make about, I mean, the people who are going to be impacted most with this are the neighbours, and there are objections. So I would just be grateful of comments around the first 3 bullet points of the objections about not wishing the entrance to be widened, and as owner of entrance not being informed of planning, and widening of access will have highway safety implications for use of lay-by. I'd be grateful for comments on those, please.
Mr. Tishner.
Yeah, so I guess I would probably clarify that point, because actually that relates to the proposed, those are a summary of all the comments received during the consultation, that they actually relate to when the proposal was off the lay-by further up the road, when it was proposing to use a different access, and we received comments, unfavourable comments that people didn't want to see, and that was a very narrow access they didn't want to see widened. I think it may be helpful for the avoidance of doubt that we could add a condition to this permission to say that the access is only the access shown on the plan and not any other access onto the lay-by, because that was an access that other people also had concerns about, certainly.
Do you want to show it on the laptop?
Yeah. Okay, members will be able to see on the right hand sort of side of the plan, you'll see that the blue line wraps around, you can see almost where it comes out on that lay-by that just sort of skirts off of the edge of the A38. So that was the original point of access that was proposed for this scheme. So that's what those comments on that report relate to. And if we did impose a condition saying that the access shall only be by the access approved shown within the red line, that would, I guess, remove any doubt as to where the point of access for this scheme would be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The access onto the A38 is actually, in fact, acceptable without any problem at all. It's a dead straight road both ways. I myself have a caravan in storage, not there by the way, because it's not open yet, but I do have a caravan in storage myself on a very big place with a lot of caravans. And any time I've ever been to collect or drop it off, I'm the only person. It's not as if anybody's trying to say there's going to be a stream of 2 or 3 caravans at any one time going in or out. It doesn't happen that way. So I've got no problem at all with access for caravans F&B. That's okay. As pointed out already by the case officer, the access from the lay-by that's null and void. It's gone by and it's only on the main gate. I still stand by that people are allowed to be diverse. There's no problem with this in my mind as we see it, and I looked at it and I have gone through all the notes. And the problems that have been flagged up so far by the Parish Council, not all of them have actually been ratified or approved. So for the moment, I actually still think it's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? If not, I would be looking for a recommendation. Councillor Hendry?
Recommend the case officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you,
So
Mr. Chairman.
just to confirm, that's with the
With
changed wording
yeah,
in terms of the lighting
absolutely.
and the condition relating to the access being through the red line access, not any other access.
No, fully agree. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kingham?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to second the recommendation
Thank
with
you.
those conditions.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other comments or hands raised, in which case we have a recommendation to grant permission subject to the amended conditions as outlined. Those in favour of that, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's unanimous.
That's unanimous, but I think we should record that one member has had to leave the room. So it's unanimous of those who are left in the room.
So there's 11.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, in which case that takes us then to the next application. I would just suggest that we will need to get Councillor Scott, but also there is a slight handover of officers, so there will be, if we can just take a couple of minutes while we do that handover. Are members wanting to have a short comfort break at that point? Okay, we'll do that. So we'll take a short break. We'll restart at 25:02.
Before committee, as it's supported by the Parish Council, who unanimously offered this application their full support, it was felt that not only was the design in keeping with the area, but that it supported the neighbourhood plan and supported a self-build for a family embedded within the local community. I do have an update not previously recorded in the report. Councillor McGuinty's comments had gone awry, but he has confirmed, and I quote, "I wish to support this application for all the reasons stated by the Parish Council, with one addition. I feel that this application infills and completes this row of homes in a sympathetic manner." The Parish Council unanimously offered this application their full support at the meeting on the 20th of September. Felt that not only was the design in keeping with the area, but it supported the neighbourhood plan and supported a self-build for a family embedded within the local community. That's just a re-quote of the parish's quote. So the main considerations, as the application is in outline with all matters reserved, surrounds the principle of development in sustainability terms. And this relates to the location of the site, having regard to Sedgemoor's spatial strategy. The key concern surrounds whether the proposal constitutes a sustainable form of development or is isolated and separate from the village and therefore within the countryside and is therefore an unsustainable form of development. This is also linked to countryside protection policies, notably surrounding the preservation of the countryside for its own intrinsic value. Since the previous refusal on 2 grounds, evidence of local needs connection and registration on the self-build register has been provided, and this is accepted. So the previous reason for refusal on that grounds, a lack of local connection, has been overcome. However, given that the location is where it is, it's no closer to the village core, and is in the countryside, then the previous reason for refusal on this ground can't be overcome, and the application is therefore necessarily recommended for refusal. The application is in outline with all matters reserved. Clearly, any new dwelling will necessarily be built close to the road, given the site constraints. It will be visible and impact on rural countryside character. Other issues could be addressed through reserved matters stage if approved. Now, since the previous application, phosphates has become an issue, as members will be aware. So as competent authority, in the absence of a scheme, it's not possible for us to recommend approval at this stage in terms of phosphates. The applicant will say something about that in their presentation. So this is the site plan from the committee report. This slide shows the site outlined in red to the north of the existing dwelling, which is number 27 Pedwell Hill. It's located on the west side of the lane. You can see that the eastern part of the site is part of this elongated garden of number 27, and then there's the hedge which forms part of this pasture, and so the western part of the site is currently pasture land. The smaller of the plans is a location plan, and that just shows the location of the site in relation to the junction with the A39, and that it's outside or not adjoining the settlement boundary for Ashcott. So this is the settlement boundary for Ashcott. It's shown in green. Infill development beyond but closely related to the settlement is permissible in principle to meet local connection self-build needs. However, the site lies way beyond the settlement boundary and is outside of this location plan. It's sort of off in this white area to the left. So this is a 2020 aerial image of the site, showing its rural location. I'm sorry, it's a bit dark. I'm sorry about that. The next close-up might be a bit clearer. The site's approximately 1.2 kilometres walking distance from the junction of the A39 with the start of the High Street. So this is the closer aerial view. It shows the trees and existing field hedge running north-south through the site, and the area of pasture to the west, which would be included within the application site. You can't see my cursor, can you? No. So this site shows the site in red and other homes along Pedwell Hill shown. I've tried to identify them in blue, so it gives you a feel of how many dwellings there are in that area. The larger rectangle at the bottom is part of a farm, and it has a number of dwellings. I think it might have a holiday let in there as well. So the next couple of slides are photographs showing the site frontage and the existing field gate, which is likely to be used as the access. The first is from the opposite side of Pedwell Hill, looking west into the site. The second is looking southwest into the garden of 27 Pedwell Lane that would remain. These are views directly through the site, through the field gate, showing the garden as it exists and beyond it. And then members can see the hedge at the back, which will be taken down and the site extended into the pasture beyond that. So just to get a general picture and feel for the area, this is the view of the site with the weeping willow. That's close to the access. It wouldn't be possible to retain that. Its loss and replacement with a dwelling would significantly urbanise the current open rural character. This is panning south towards number 27 Pedwell Hill and the garden. And then this next site is a view south from what would likely be the access looking down Pedwell Hill, and then to the north that would be the visibility up Pedwell Hill. So just a few wider shots to give members an idea of the lane. There's a 13-mile-an-hour speed limit. There's no footway or street lighting. This is a Google Street View showing 27 Pedwell Lane, Pedwell Hill on the left, with the site beyond further up to the left. These are some wider views showing the route from the site into the village if you were walking or cycling. So this is a Google Street View of the junction of Pedwell Hill with the A39, and then a view further along the A39 towards Ashcott. It can be seen that there are no pavements or street lighting on what is, if members know, a busy section of the A39. Further along the A39, again, this shows sort of lack of safe pedestrian access or street lighting. Having regard to the criteria under policy CO2, which permits infill housing in the countryside, while this proposal is for self-build, it's not considered to be infilling of the main part of the area of the settlement, which is the policy justification. It can be seen from the slides that the route for pedestrians is not safe and would not enhance sustainable patterns of development, that the services and amenities of the village are not within walking distance over 1.2 kilometres away is a significant drawback in terms of its sustainability credentials. Turning to phosphates, as members will no doubt be aware, applications for new residential development can't be approved unless a habitats regulation assessment has been carried out and it's been determined that likely significant effects do not arise. So in circumstances where the application is not recommended favourably, it wasn't considered appropriate to require the applicant to go to the expense of engaging a qualified ecologist to address the phosphates issue. And as members know, we haven't yet got a solution to that issue. However, details would first be required in the event of any alternative decision, including if it went to appeal. So in conclusion, a previous application was refused on the grounds that the development is in the countryside and is unsustainable, and also that there was no proven local needs connection at that time. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the evidence of that local needs connection has now been satisfied. Having regard to the principle of development in sustainability terms, the location of the site is still in the countryside. It's away from the main built-up part of the village with no safe walking or cycling opportunities, and where reliance on car travel would be high and is contrary to policy CO3 and guidance in the NPPF. There's also the phosphates issue, which cannot yet be overcome. So accordingly, officers are recommending the application be refused. Thank you, members. I'll be happy to answer any questions, Chairman. Thank you.
We have one speaker on this application who is joining us through Teams. So again, Sue Franks, if I could ask you to enable your microphone.
Good morning, councillors. I am Sue Franks, and with my husband Stuart, we are the applicants for the above application. We have submitted this application in order to help provide our son with a home close to relation to the village of Ashcott. The family have had close relations with Ashcott and Pedwell since 1964, when Stuart's parents moved to the family to Hill Farm in Pedwell. In 1992, Stuart and myself bought 27 Pedwell Hill, and a few years after, the farm business diversified and took over a local undertaking business, which has continued to this day. The Chapel of Rest is sited on Bath Road in Ashcott. Matthew, our son, will be helping to run the family business, which is funeral directing, as well as looking to set himself up as an electrician when properly qualified. This is why we're trying our best to support our son settle back in the village, to contribute to and to be close to the family business and the local community. Given the nature of our business, being available locally is important because we are on call 24/7. The proposal is supported by the Parish Council. The site is extended garden to 27 Pedwell Hill and can provide the necessary space for a decent sized dwelling with a garden and off-road parking. In fact, our neighbouring property north of 27 is number 31, and there has been a site of a mobile home at 29 previously. Pedwell Hill sits in close proximity to Ashcott village and is peppered with houses along its length, joining the hamlet of Pedwell to its larger neighbour. This proposal will fit seamlessly within the existing development and will provide a home in the village for our hard-working young son, who will contribute to the long term of the local economy.
You have 1 minute to go.
We consider that this need to live close to work and with the lack of alternative options in the local community brings benefit to the community and to the environment and outweighs any concerns. And this commute to the Chapel of Rest, 600 metres, which makes it a sustainable location. Currently consider that the site loads within a catchment area for Ramsar. There is sufficient space adjacent to the site to provide phosphate mitigation, and we would ask that we would be happy to deal with it in principle of the development. Is it possible to defer the application while we continue to discuss this with our consultants on a viable scheme to clear the habitats regulation assessment? This is a modest home for our son and his future family in a local village where he will work and have local connections to the village. With regard to walking distance, the A39 was previously cited by Ian, but actually there's a very pleasant walk.
Time on you there, Mrs. Dranks, but thank you very much for your comments and thank you for bearing with us with the technology today.
Okay, thank you.
Can I? Oh, has anyone got their microphone turned on? No. Okay, I think we're back. We're okay. Is that all right? Yes, I think we're okay. All right, thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions, please? We'll start with Councillor Kingham. We're not hearing you. We are now. No, try again.
How about that?
Yeah. Yes.
Can the officer just explain to me a little bit more about the phosphates? We have a single dwelling outline application on the side of a hill. How would that affect the phosphates to start with?
So it principally surrounds the foul waste from a dwelling, and how that's treated where there's no main drains, and so there's a phosphates calculator, and so the ecologist would input the data of the existing situation surrounding the pasture use, and then the proposed dwelling use. There's a calculator, and if there's a net addition of phosphates, then some mitigation is required. What that mitigation might be and whether it can be provided on site or off site, there's no solution to that yet. So all such applications are currently held pending a resolution of that matter. So I think what the applicant was suggesting in a presentation is that if members are mindful to grant permission, then could the application be deferred and delegated to officers to make that decision after they've addressed the phosphates issue. So we can't approve the application at the moment in the absence of a proven solution, but we could defer the application for that issue to be addressed at some moment in the future. I don't know if that's clear or not.
I presume there was main drainage through Headway Hill.
So even if there's main drainage, there's still an issue with additional phosphates from additional dwellings through the output of the sewage treatment works.
It's how it drains back.
Be close to the mic.
It's how it drains back through the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar site. So if there's any hydrological connection, it is through foul sewage. So it's how the sewage treatment plants, where they discharge as well, can affect quite extensive areas of Somerset at the moment. So in terms of the one dwellings, that is most of the issues in Sedgemoor. We're only getting the one dwellings which are caught because the key areas where there's a connection with the Ramsar site are out in the countryside and towards the eastern side of the district. In Taunton and Somerset West and Taunton and South Somerset, it's Taunton and Yeovil being affected. So obviously a much more of an extensive issue in terms of stopping development, but it is an issue. It's that hydrological link back into the Ramsar, which is the issue.
I mean, as far as application and an outline, I mean, so I don't have a problem with the application. I don't regard it as completely out in the open. It's within other buildings within that area, and I don't see as it would be a problem. I don't have a problem with the application at the moment.
Thank you. I think, again, just to confirm, confirm for members, obviously there are two reasons for refusal on this application, which in effect are two hurdles that the applicant has to get themselves over. In terms of the phosphate, as you heard from the officer, they haven't been asked to do the work on that because the recommendation was refusal, because it would be unfair to ask them to do an awful lot of work to justify how the phosphate issue can be dealt with if in principle it's not going to be granted because it doesn't meet the CO2 policy issue. So in effect, as a committee, I think what you need to work out is, one, are you happy with the fact that it actually meets CO2, our policy CO2? And if that's the case, then you've got the issue to think about as the sort of phosphates and sulfates. But I mean, I think what it would be unfair for us to do is in effect defer something, ask the applicant to go off and do a lot of work, and then come back and say, well, actually, in principle, we're not going to allow you to have it anyway. So that's the sort of two stages that we need to think about as we're debating it today. Councillor Hendry.
Yeah. Sticking with that same subject just for the minute, the case officer. I haven't come across this before, this in such detail, this thing phosphate. How long ago did this actually come into be that we said, okay, we have to consider this phosphate business before an application? Just how long ago did this actually come into be then?
So, yeah, I'm happy to take it. I mean, it was identified in terms of a county-wide approach. So officers across the Somerset County identified it as an issue probably about 2 years ago now, since we started dealing with it. So it's been an emerging issue that has developed over the last 2 years. As I say, the Sedgemoor's relationship with the Ramsar site is less hydrologically linked, so it's not been such a significant issue for us, but we are part of that county-wide response in terms of dealing with it. We understand what the issue is. We know the area of impact now across the county. The next step is trying to develop the mitigation methods so that you can actually put compensation in place to allow development to happen. And obviously there's quite a need to do that given the amount of development that is affected in some of the other parts of Somerset. But for us, it's probably not on your radar so much, because probably limited numbers of applications that have come to committee have had this issue affected. It is effectively the eastern part of the district around sort of Ashcott, Wedmore type area that is effectively affected. But yeah, it has to have a hydrological link with the Ramsar site, and so far we've been able to argue through the ecologists of the county council that there hasn't been that issue raised.
Okay. Given it was only within the last 2 or 3 years that this was brought into play, what would have happened if this application came before us 4 years ago, before all this raised its head? Would, on the balance of probabilities, would this application have been, okay, there's 1 or 2 little things to iron out, but generally speaking, it's a local family who want to build a house on a lane where there are properties already at this moment in time, one either side, so there has to be a drainage connection there because of the properties already there. Had this come before us, say 4 years ago, would we have then said, okay, balance of probabilities, yes, they can have it to go through? How would the drainage being put in place then, before all this was brought into play? Because what we're saying here now is you're dealing with something that really well, I can't speak for anybody else really, but for me, I've never really come across this in such detail before. Precisely for the fact that you're saying it's never really been in the domain for the last couple of years, really. Well, that's when it came into being. So would this have gone ahead 4 years ago?
The previous application was prior to this issue, so the application that was considered previously, phosphates wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
But we refused it because, of course, reason one is the fundamental reason we're refusing the application, because the phosphates thing might work itself out. They may be able to do the work to demonstrate the phosphates issue isn't ultimately a reason for refusal. What we have, though, at the moment is that fundamental reason that is contrary to the self-build policy, and therefore we can't support it in principle. So the phosphates issue is really the secondary issue. That's what I'm saying. The most fundamental concern is, and I take what you're saying about the local connection and the local person, and that part of the policy is satisfied. There is clearly a local connection with the applicant's son, but fundamentally it doesn't address the principal issue in terms of its location. It's an unsustainable location. It's not within a cluster of dwellings, and therefore doesn't meet the self-build policy. But Ian may want to just illustrate that a bit further.
Thanks, Stuart. So, gone the wrong way. I think there's two slides which demonstrate the principle. So there you've got Ashcott with the settlement boundary shown in green. So in principle, anything within the settlement boundaries entirely acceptable, new residential dwellings. If there's infill development close to that settlement boundary, but close to the village, but outside the settlement boundary. So, you know, you can see that beyond that green, there's some buildings where it would be infill development. That's where the policy allows an exception for local needs. So if you can walk to the village, but it's close to that settlement boundary. So outside of that green, if it's open market housing, the answer is no. If you prove a local need, the answer might be yes. But the difficulty is that this location is off that map. It's too far away. And so if I go to this next slide, which is the one showing the site in red and the other houses in blue. Because it's so far from the village, if you allow this here, then what's to stop someone else saying, well, I'd like a house in my garden here and here and here and here and here, and that gets all infilled, and it's over a kilometre's walking distance from the village. So the difficulty is that this is in the countryside. It's not adjacent to the settlement boundary, and you could say it's infill because it's between two properties, but it's still the countryside. If you allowed that everywhere else in Sedgemoor, that you just double the amount of dwellings in the countryside. So that's the in principle problem. The policy tries to be flexible for local needs connection right next to settlement boundaries, but what it doesn't do, it doesn't permit dwellings in the countryside. So the determining factor isn't that the applicant owns a house and they have a garden that they can build the son's property in. The determining factor is where it is. It should be sustainable in relation to the village.
I've got Councillor Pearce and then Councillor Grimes. So Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I can understand why the family have submitted an application here, because on the face of it, it meets their needs. But in terms of policy, and my goodness, often we're arguing to try and cling hold to a policy to protect the environment and the countryside. But in this case, I think it sets a really dangerous precedent. For me, it's, and more importantly, policy-wise, it's unfortunately the wrong application in the wrong place. And therefore, I would like to support the officer's recommendation and propose that recommendation, please.
Hello, working? Actually, agree with Councillor Pearce. I couldn't support this for the reasons given by the officer, but that also includes the phosphate issue. But I think the first reasons why I can't refuse this is the reason. So I'm happy to second the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to support Councillor Pearce and just say that clearly this hinges on the concept of infill, and this isn't within the boundary, and there are exceptions, and we were shown the list that all of those criteria should be fulfilled, and only one was, and 4 or 5 weren't. So yeah, I would have seconded this proposal to refuse.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions before we move to a vote? I'm not seeing any, so we have the recommendation that's been moved and seconded, which is to refuse permission. Those in favour of that, please show.
2, 3, 4, 12.
Okay, and those against, please show. And any abstentions?
1 abstention.
1 abstention. So that's 12 in support of the recommendation, none against, and 1 abstention, and that accounts for all members present in the room. So that is clearly carried. The permission is refused. Thank you, members. If you can turn on your applications, I think the next one is on page 29. And Councillor Evans, thank you. We move to Cheddar, and Ms. Chorley, I think you're introducing this one for us. Again, I think you know the you know the rules now. If you can count yourself in, and we'll make sure that we can hear your presentation. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, so the application, just to again, is for the change of use of garage from residential to mixed use for residential and for business use for dog grooming. The application site is 20 St Andrews Road. We're within the settlement boundary of Cheddar, Tier 1 settlement. And this first image here just shows where the application site is exactly. So we're looking at this semi-detached dwelling, as I say, predominantly residential area within the settlement boundary for Cheddar. And location plan, just to, again, and site plan, just to show members where we are. And we're looking at the kind of an element of this garage here. It's shown slightly more clearly in these plans that the applicant has provided. So this is the existing arrangement where you have the garage access through the kind of standard up and over door and a small area at the rear. And what they're looking to do is to retain this garage space at the front. Obviously, it won't be large enough for the parking of a vehicle, so that will result in the loss of one parking space for the site. And that will allow the partial conversion of the rear area to this kind of reception with a desk and a grooming table and bath for the occupant of the dwelling to carry out dog grooming on a commercial basis. The applicant has provided a parking plan to show that there is scope for 3 off-road parking spaces still, which will serve the dwelling and the business. And these images here just show the current arrangement. So we're looking at this kind of white detached garage here. And you can see that there's still adequate space for 2 vehicles on the driveway, and the applicant currently parks in front of the dwelling. It's not a dissimilar arrangement to other properties along that road. There is restricted on-road parking during the summer months, and that has been a concern raised by the Parish Council, that by permitting the business use in this area, it will result in an unacceptable impact in terms of parking and highways. On that point particularly, it is demonstrated that there will remain sufficient off-road parking to serve the dwelling and the business use. It is not considered that the proposed use would result in an unacceptable impact on highway safety. It's proposed to limit the operation to the occupant only, so no employees. Hours of operation are to be restricted by condition to Monday to Thursday. That's at the applicant's request. And the noise and disturbance that could be associated through the business are not considered to be more than would be expected through usual residential use. There won't be any change to the visual impact. Externally, there are no changes proposed. And just to remind everybody, in terms of the principle, we are within the settlement boundary for the Tier 1 settlement Cheddar, and it will be for the occupant only, no employees, and we can restrict that by condition, which is what is proposed. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That okay now? Thank you. Right. Any questions or comments, please, from members? Yeah, Councillor Hendry.
Sorry, Chairman, me again. I know somebody in Burnham-on-Sea with a 2-bedroom semi-detached bungalow who's been doing dog grooming for about 7 or 8 years. All that time on a residential estate. Bungalows either side of them, never any problem or complaints from anybody. And parking is never an issue simply because one person comes with their car, drops their dog off, gets in the car and leaves. Come back for the dog an hour later and then they take the next dog in, and that's the way they operate. They never have a car park full of people with 2 or 3 cars. So on the basis I have first-hand information from somebody who I know who actually does this and has been for some years, I don't see a problem of any kind at all. Absolutely nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from members? I'm not seeing any. Yes, Councillor Kingham.
Was that a proposal from Councillor Hendry?
I don't think there was a proposal at that point. I think he was waiting to see if there's anyone else going to
Yeah,
speak.
I propose the recommendation.
Okay. I'll come back to Councillor Hendry and then Councillor Perry. You need to use the microphone though, Councillor Hendry. Or, okay, I'll come to Councillor Perry.
Okay.
Try again.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, I will second that recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's any further comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Scott.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that it says that the, I'm not sure if this is from the application, that the hours of operating could be restricted by condition. And I would support it as long as those hours were included.
Yeah, Mr. Howlett.
Yeah, condition 4 on page 33. As Emma said, Monday to Thursday.
That's about condition 4 is about the parking area.
Condition 5. Condition 5.
Sorry.
The right page number.
Okay, sorry. Councillor Scott, you okay with condition 5? Yeah. I'm not seeing any other comments or questions. So we've had the recommendation moved and seconded that we to grant permission. Those in favour, please show. That would appear to be unanimous. That's clearly carried. That's unanimous. So permission is granted. Members, we're approaching 11:30. We've got two, as I see it, two applications to go before we break for lunch. Do you want to take a comfort break at this point or carry on? I'm in your hands. Carry on? Carry on. Okay, thank you very much. So if you turn then to the next application, which on page 40, because the application on page 35 was withdrawn because the parish council on amended plans, I think, changed their view so that they were in line with the officer's view, so therefore it wasn't needed to come to committee. So page 40, we're in Parish of Compton Bishop, and Mr. Lloyd, I think you're... Okay, bear with us one moment. We will take a couple of minutes just to do a quick IT changeover.
Don't have anyone else online other than ourselves.
No. Well,
But we are being recorded, so it could be watched later on the recording.
no, in that case,
But we required YouTube viewing now, so...
It wasn't about what we did last time. We could do with the sound a bit easier because we don't have anyone having to come in on the sound.
yeah.
So we really need to just get the screen.
Yeah.
Next time we just do one computer setup.
Yeah. The officers switch into the computer rather than switch to the computer.
That's what we're doing. That's what we agreed to. I haven't actually seen anybody wipe anything.
No.
We shared anything.
No, but the mic's been going up and down like a
Yeah.
fiddler's elbow, and it's not been.
Does anybody actually want to wipe their microphone down? Yeah. We did provide you with wipes.
Yeah, this is
Funny enough, I'm sure Councillor Scott actually spoke, so she might just want to wipe. Yeah, we always edit. Yeah, no, we always edit.
Well, we're not operating. I think that's fine. So,
we had a coffee break.
yeah, are we? Do you think we're live again? Okay. Right, members, we're going to restart. I think our IT is back up and running. So we'll again move to page 40, Parish of Compton Bishop and Mr. Lloyd.
So this is a retrospective application. It's before committee as it's supported by officers, but Compton Bishop Parish Council object, considering there to be conflict with the village design statement. I've no updates to report. The main issue is whether the design and appearance of the dwelling as altered is acceptable, including any effect on the natural beauty of the Mendip Hills AONB. As I said, the Parish Council object on design grounds, citing conflict with the village design statement. So this is the plan from the committee report. This is the existing block plan, linking the development and the rear extension. So there's previously been an application which has approved some extensions and linking an addition into the dwelling. They then sought a non-material amendment for some changes, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. But that application was refused, not on the planning merits of the case, but on the basis that the changes were material. They required planning permission, and that is what is now sought. So this is a recent aerial photograph showing the site in its wider context on Church Lane, and the absence of immediate near neighbours. That's the site in the centre outlined in blue. This is a closer aerial shot which shows that the application property is a detached dwelling with its main front elevation fronting onto the lane. Now, members can see that that's what it used to look like. It now links in. So the previous edition linked the two together and built a garage. That was all approved. Then they made some changes to that without permission and sought a non-material amendment for it, which was refused, which is now why we've got the current planning application. I hope I've clarified things and not confused things for you. But as you see the photographs, hopefully things will become clearer. So these are the public elevations from Church Lane. And what you can see is that the property's been refurbished to what is, I consider to be a high standard. This is the view of the rear of the property as built. So what was approved is this rear addition, but with a very shallow pitched roof. But what they've actually built is a flat roofed extension with a glazed balcony, and they've extended a window to create a door to walk out onto the balcony. And this next slide shows you the view of the balcony. So that's what it's like on the balcony. So you can see on the left hand there's a low parapet wall and then some glazed balustrading. This is a garage. They made some sort of minor alterations to the garage, but also they built some steps that you can see to the left there, and that's a closer view. So there's a small storage area above the garage, and that's now accessible from the outside. So the Parish Council considered the approved low-sloped roof scheme with windows above was a superior design compared to this flat roof structure with glass balustrade that's been constructed without the approval. However, it's not a case of preferring one over the other. This is the scheme that's before you. If you support the scheme, you approve it. If you don't support the scheme, you refuse it. Parish also consider the as-built stone, non-rendered flat roof structure to be ugly and out of character with the existing building. That's a judgment members will have to make from the photographs that I've provided. I consider it's fine and in keeping. The stone matches. The glazed balustrading is a modern element, but you do get modern and traditional mixed elements which work together, and I consider that to be the case in this instance. The parish consider the application doesn't comply with the village design statement for those reasons highlighted in yellow. There are, however, no near neighbours. The use of stone and render is consistent with the palette used in other properties locally. The key elements are they're not visible from the road or in wider public views. There's no near neighbours and no amenity issues arise. As I said, the modern element I don't feel detracts from the historic cottage character, and it provides for a good modern standard of living, in my view. So these are the approved plans and the approved elevation. So you can see that what was approved is the rear addition with a very shallow pitched roof with the windows above, and that was the garage. So the proposed layout doesn't really change. There's just some very minor elevational changes to window positions and sizes. Overall, there's less windows than approved. And then this is it as proposed with the glazed balustrade and the door that leads out onto the balcony. And then this is the garage as built, showing the steps up the side. So the main issue, as I've said, surrounds whether the design and appearance of the dwelling as altered is acceptable or not, including whether alterations conserve the natural beauty of the Mendip Hills AONB. The Parish Council's concerns surround design, and they consider that it conflicts with the village design statement, although they have no issue as regards AONB impacts, and officers concur on that point. So notwithstanding the parish's concerns, the development as constructed is considered to be of an acceptable design and appearance. The glazed balustrade is a modern element, but the juxtaposition of the old and new is commonplace, not out of place, not visible in wider public views, and accordingly officers recommend approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from members, please? Councillor Hendry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the only thing we're being asked to consider here today is if that's acceptable, the design and what's been put there. That's it, nothing else on the table, exactly that. My answer in short is yes. It's not that far from what was originally proposed. The footprint hasn't changed, nothing like that at all. Slight, okay, balcony on the top. Generally speaking, I think they've done a fantastic job, and I wish the house was mine. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, please, from members?
I'd like to propose the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Facey.
Yes, Chairman. Well happy to propose it, Chairman. Even from this distance and with a trained, reasonably enthusiastic architectural little bit of knowledge I've got, some of the work that's gone into that's really class. I'm going to be a bit of a Luddite now. If you can go back into the closer view there, on the right-hand side, the people, obviously the owners of it, the money they spent on that, they've actually got reproduction Somerset galvanised gutters and downpipes. And we're talking about £27 a metre. So they've obviously looked into that, and Stuart Kingham has no doubt picked it up as well. So sorry to be a bit of a Luddite on it, but happy to second it and go with the officer's recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members? Seeing any, so we have the recommendation to grant permission. Those in favour of that, please show. That be unanimous? Yep, so that's clearly carried. That is unanimous. Right, members, next application is on page 49.
Can you just on this one get Peter's presentation?
Right, members, if we can restart again. As I say, if we can move to page 49 on the agenda. Will Abington and Mr. Titchener, if you'd like to introduce this one, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is the reorganisation of an existing traveller site. So it's to increase the total number of pitches. So currently consented for 11, and they're seeking to increase by 6 pitches up to 17. It's part retrospective because they've put the hard standing in for 2 of the pitches. The site is known as the Poove. It's on Cosington Lane. It says it's Abington Parish. It's more closely related to Cosington. It sort of joins on the western edge of Cosington. You'll see from the plans in a second. So we're sort of northeast of Bridgewater. It's just off. This is Cossington Lane here that runs between Woollavington and Cossington. And if I just zoom in, we'll see it here. So Cossington on the right-hand side here, the edge of Woollavington on the left-hand side. And it's quite a large site, as you'll see. This large rectangle is the site known as the Booth. So previously granted on appeal in about 2004, I believe, sort of set out around this long sort of spine track. And then there's these little grey areas, which are the sort of crushed stone areas that comprise the individual pitches themselves. It's quite a different setup from many traveller sites that we see in the district in terms of what you might imagine. This is people living in touring caravans, not static caravans. The plots are only delineated by the laying of the crushed stone. They're not bounded by walls, fences, anything like that you might expect on some other sites, and some of which are in the vicinity. There are other sites located adjoining. So there's a site here. There's another site here called Henshaw Paddocks, and those are some of those more what we might say more traditionally set up sites of what you expect from traveller sites. So west of Cossington, as I say, granted an appeal in 2004. Previously, the permission was then amended in 2008, so that allowed up to 11. As I say, it's touring caravan types only. So one of a number of traveller sites within the vicinity. Now this would see those pitches, so it's got 11 consent at the moment, increased up to 16. So what we're looking at is the acceptability of an increase of 6 pitches. And the proposals at committee, because there are local objections from the parish councils, Cossington and Woollavington parish councils have raised an objection to the proposal. Red line just delineating the extent of the site. And you can see the individual pitches marked out by these little rectangles. It's a small amenity block located sort of towards the western boundary of the site that everyone has the benefit of the use of that on site. The plan on the left-hand side shows the existing layout where the pitches are. The plan on the right shows the proposed. So the areas are in the grey show where the additional pitches are to be done, and they're all to be located on the right-hand side of the spine track. 2 of them have been laid already, and then so that's in these 2 here, slightly darker colour. The other 4 yet to be laid. So that's why it's a part retrospective. Just by way of an update, just want to touch on a letter that was sent from Cossington Parish Council to the Council's Chief Executive and Officer and Chairman of the Committee and our Assistant Director following the publication of this report. So I just want to brief members on that. So it raises and reiterates concerns of the parishes regarding the proposal and other applications within the vicinity. The issues raised include that it's one of 4 in the vicinity, and there are other applications yet to be determined on some of the adjoining traveller sites or land adjoining the other traveller sites. They're not. One of them is for additional 9 pitches elsewhere. One of them is for an increase of another site by 1 pitch. Another one is on one of those sites but doesn't increase the number of pitches at all. But it is one of 4 applications currently undetermined within that wider area. There's concern from the Parish Council about the justification for the proposal in the report being the lack of pitches and a requirement that pitches be allocated in the development plan document in the Council's local plan. Concern about the quantum of sites in the Cossington and Woollavington area. They say total about 50 pitches. Concern about that the perimeter of the Cossington playing fields is adjoined by traveller sites. The Cossington playing fields is on the right-hand side, sort of between the village and some of these sites. A statement that the recent expansion has not occurred without problems, that statement isn't expanded on in the letter. Concern that proposals are passed despite local concerns, but welcome further discussions with the council and the people the letter sent to at a later date. So just in terms of the principal matters and the context for looking at these type of applications. So there's government policy, planning there's a document called Planning Policy for Traveller Sites. So that says proposals must be determined in accordance with the development plan. One of the things it states is that sites should be limited in open countryside where they're away from existing settlements, but that needs to be balanced out with the fact that in rural areas, proposals should respect the scale of and not dominate communities or place undue pressure on local infrastructure. So the local policy context set by policy D8, that applies a criteria-based policy in the absence of a development plan document allocating any sites. And we use that at the moment. The development plan document process is something that they are in the early stages of because they need to update the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment. So that's where they go out, interview gypsies and travellers as part of an evidence-based approach. It's one of the pieces of evidence that underpins a local plan. Because of COVID, you can't do face-to-face interviews, and it's a county-wide document, that one. So that's taken longer to prepare than had been expected. So until that time, we are using a criteria-based approach for determining applications. That criteria-based approach is set in D8. But the tests in that approach are quite similar to government policy. Based on government policy, there must be a need for sites, and those tests about scale and the dominance of the local community are set out as well. So that's something that we and members have to consider. So just touching on need, the local plan sets the need figure over the plan period, and that set a total requirement of 69 pitches to be delivered over that plan period of 2011 to 2032. Now, at the point the local plan was adopted, 32 of those pitches had already been delivered, so there's a residual requirement of 37. So there's an outstanding need for pitches at the current time. So in the context of this current application, there's need yet to be met, and we're talking about 6 pitches here against an outstanding need. One of the other things that government policy says we must be able to do is demonstrate a 5-year supply of sites. So that's about a pipeline of sites coming forward, either with permissions or in allocations, and that's something that cannot be demonstrated at the current time. So that's one material consideration that needs to be fed into the considerations today. And just some photos to get a context of the site. So the sort of top one on the top right probably shows the whole site in context. So that's looking back up towards the access road. So you can see what I mentioned about everyone here lives in touring caravans. The sites aren't particularly delineated other than the compacted gravel that's been laid. And the photos below sort of show some, what one plot looks like. You can see the hedgerow boundaries are still around the outside of the site. It's actually quite green. It was obviously originally a field, but much of the fact that it was a field is still retained other than where the pitches are and the track is. There's some trees interspersed amongst the that lead up towards the roadway as well. And then just a few other photos, you get a sense of what the site's like. That's a pitch where those vehicles are currently parked. You can see the mature boundaries along the side, and that's the same in the lower photo as well. And these are pictures of the sort of right-hand side where some of the other pictures that haven't yet been put in will also be done in future. And again, just a couple other pictures, just looking further down the site where a couple of the other sites are going to go. So you can see it's pretty consistent throughout. It's a very well-contained site in terms of the boundaries are mature, long-standing, and are consistent throughout. So those tests, I've already touched on need, but the thing that the parish councils have raised, and one of the main considerations we've had to look at, is looking at that test about the impact on the settled community, how you assess dominance. And in the views of the parish councils, they say the scale of sites in that area dominates the local community. And when we're looking at national policy, doesn't set one test about how you look at dominance. So in terms of how to go about that assessment, what I did was looked at what inspectors had done on appeal decisions, and they'd done it in different ways. So there was no set way, and I pulled out some of the different ways they'd done it to try and examine that issue. And some of the things they talked about, government policy talked about pressure on infrastructure. Some inspectors had taken a quantitative approach, so sort of comparing number of the population in an area versus the number of people living on gypsy sites. Another way they did it was look at number of caravans versus number of homes. Another way is visual impact. So actually when you're at a place, visually, does it feel like the scale of something, the size of something, its prominence is out of context with the when you're viewing that in context of the village. So there's 3 different ways, and I've tried to take a look at all 3 of them. So in terms of infrastructure, So education is one element of infrastructure. We sought the views of county education. They came back and said, well, we wouldn't normally comment on sites of this size. They tend to only comment on major schemes, so that's 10 dwellings or more. So this already falls below a threshold where they wouldn't normally see that there would be an education impact. But looking at on a site-wide basis, they say there would not be an impact on its own anyway. But if you consider it cumulatively with the other applications that we've got on the books, but we haven't yet determined, and that's not normally the way it would be done, there is the potential for some capacity impacts on Wolverhampton Primary and Christmas Secondary School and Street. But then they came back to say, but even then they wouldn't object. Their approach where they identify capacity-related issues is to request monies from the Community Infrastructure Levy pot. So there isn't really an educational infrastructure issue arising from the site and this site per se, and any cumulative issues when considered about other sites which don't have permission would nonetheless be addressed through Community Infrastructure Levy. Highways is of course another infrastructure element that we could look at. Now the site is an existing site, it's already there, has an existing access onto Cossington Lane, and this proposal will just continue the use of that access. The Highways Authority commented in detail on the proposal and wanted a condition about visibility only, but they otherwise raised no objection. They weren't concerned about the level of vehicles arising, for example, had no concerns about visibility other than as long as a condition was attached. So in terms of highways infrastructure, it doesn't seem to be an infrastructure concern there either. So the quantitation approach is another one that I tried. I think it's difficult to do this because actually the data is quite limited when you start looking at this kind of scale. So I've tried to put a comparison in there, but I wouldn't certainly want to rely on this as the only means. So in terms of parish estimates, you know, Cossington Parish has had a resident population of 564 residents in the 2011 census. It's already 10 years out of date, but it's the best information that was available. Now, trying to work out the traveller population is much harder. How do you actually count the numbers? You know, the population will fluctuate. We have no basis for particularly counting them, and they will obviously sometimes travel. But I've tried to apply sort of a population density to the number of units we were proposing here, how many people might live in these units and what the population increase might be. We're only talking about 6 units, so that would only give a rise of 14 persons if you apply a standard household population ratio. Now, if you add all the other sites that are being proposed nearby, don't have permission, we'd be talking about a population increase of 38. Now, they haven't got permission. But still, if we look at those numbers, what we'd be talking about is a population increase of 38 versus a settled population within the broad area of 500. So on that basis, I felt it's quite difficult to conclude that the population numbers are a level that dominates. The settled population is clearly much larger. And then visually, and I've touched on some of this already, it is a very, very large site. Already. It's actually a very low density site when you go there. The caravans are very spaced out, the plots are very spaced out, there's very large areas of green space. There would continue to be very large areas of green space even after the development and if the development was carried out. So it would not overcrowd the site, it would not overdevelop the land. There would remain adequate space for parking and turning. Where the caravans are going to be set is there's a setback of 100 metres from the highway, so you come down the large central track and then the pitches are laid out. So there's already a setback of some quite considerable distance from the highway. There's existing roadside hedgerows along the side, so that's going to screen and limit the inward views. So on that basis, and when you approach from the village, what you'll primarily see is those hedgerows rather than these caravans, which are set back considerably within the site. So on a site-wide basis, it's considered to be of an appropriate size and sufficiently screened. And when I was looking at those inspectors' decisions, they had previously stated that one way to deal with the issue of overdominance was existing sites. If you could increase capacity within existing sites, if they are well screened, that might be one acceptable method of doing so. So those are those issues in the round about how I looked at it. And there's just a couple of other matters. Environmental health wanted a condition about looking at the capacity of septic tank. That septic tank is associated with the amenity block on site. We're aware from other sites within the vicinity that there could be the potential to connect the foul to the foul mains, because we know that foul mains has been extended in that area because of one of the other sites on the other side of the road went through that process. So rather than putting the wording of the condition that environmental health were putting on there, we propose a more flexibly worded condition so we can explore the option of a connection to foul, which would always be preferable than a septic tank. But if we can't, it still leaves the fallback option to make sure the septic tank has sufficient capacity. And then just to touch on something I've touched on in the other presentation about public sector equality duty. So the proposal provides accommodation for gypsies and travellers. They are a group with protected characteristics under the Act, under race. Travellers have been deemed a race under the Act, so that's something we need to be mindful of. The proposal will provide additional pitches to meet their needs, so the proposal is not going to negatively impact on their needs or their protected characteristics as defined under the Act. So I think our duties as a council would be met in the eventuality that permission was granted. So just to summarise the considerations, there is unmet need. I mentioned the absence of 5-year supply is a material consideration. And when having gone through those tests about domination, infrastructure, population, visual impact, I didn't feel that on any one of those that actually it would be of such a scale as to over-dominate. So I'm recommending permission in this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions? I've got Councillor Kingham first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point of interest, increasing the number, you're saying that they would have to install a new septic tank to accommodate the extra numbers?
Possibly. So environmental health were of the view that they wanted the septic tank to be surveyed to ensure that it had the capacity. So if the survey was done and it had the capacity, then they wouldn't need to upgrade it. But on the contrary, if it didn't.
So how does that work with phosphates?
Because this site is not in the phosphate zone. It's not very far away from it, but it is outside. So it's not an issue here. Luckily for the applicants in this case.
Okay. This particular site, I may say it's not on my ward anymore, but in the past it's been a bit of a troublesome one, but I think they've got new management, and that, like you can see from the photographs, it's a very tidy site. I don't think there's any problem within the area. Not located with that particular site. So I don't have a problem with this, and I'd like to recommend the
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had a Teams meeting, and you yourself, Councillor Chairman, you were on it, whereby a lady called Lou Hill, as I recall, she gave a very broad presentation about the gypsies in Sedgemoor. Opened my eyes dramatically. She spoke for nearly half an hour showing the presentation slides and highlighted things that you maybe wouldn't consider, in that the children, the longer they stay in the one site, they get resettled into local education. Local surgeries, these people have to have their needs met also at the same time, and the longer they stay in the one place, they get integrated into society and they go to local surgeries and get their needs. We have a duty, as a council, we have a duty of care to provide accommodation also for these people. All in all, I don't have any problem with this whatsoever. I could go on and on here, but just suffice to say I don't have a problem with it, and I'm happy to second the recommendation. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I don't particularly have a problem with this application, but can I just query the school numbers for the local schools? I do recall that when we had the planning applications for Woollavington, for some substantial housing in that area, it would put the schools under, the Woollavington school in particular, under tight numbers. But I do note that the catchment area, I think the border runs, I think, along the boundary of this site. Hence, Crispin, I think, is the secondary school catchment. And I actually think Catcott is the primary school catchment area for this site, rather than Woollavington, which is quoted in the report.
Mr. Kitchener or Mr. Just how long?
Okay, Kitchener's report.
See if I can find it for you.
So, I mean, the specific figures aren't set out in the report, I have to say. This is a position I got from County Education in terms of the actual total number. So I'm not able to draw your attention to the exact capacity-related issues. More, what I got was a summary of their position and their view on the overall numbers. And what they told us was, one of the things was, it's more a general policy that schemes below this threshold would generally give rise to very low numbers that, when considered, because you get a lots of 1, 2, 3, 4 dwelling schemes that actually they would never comment on, and they accept that when you work out the pupil numbers for those, it tends to be very, very low, based on the population that would arise from that. So there would not be a specific request. I don't have the exact figures that they base their views on, only their conclusions about how you would look at it, which was only if we and their conclusions were only showed impacts when you scaled it up with other sites. So I can only go on the views that they gave us for this site, and the views they gave us for the site where they didn't see it going to give rise to an impact. Notwithstanding, you obviously have some local knowledge about the specific impacts or what's happening at Willavington. I accept that. But I haven't got the exact figures that I can only base it on their conclusions, I'm afraid, Councillor Evans.
So, is that working? Yes. I mean, it's not just the numbers that are involved, it's also, building on Councillor Hendry's point, it is the educational impact and resources that are required for supporting children from a traveller background. I did so through much of my career, so I have some experience in this. I don't particularly have a problem with this site. I just wanted to make sure that the education infrastructure is in line. Far from it to be it for me to question County Hall officers, but I would like to have seen a more detailed report assessing the impact.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions that members have? I'm not seeing any, so at the moment we have a recommendation to grant permission which has been proposed and seconded. Those in support of that recommendation, please show. That again will appear to be unanimous. That's clearly carried. No, it was Councillor Hendry seconded and Councillor King opposed. Okay. Members, that brings us to the end of the applications we have. If you could turn in your papers to the reports, of which I think there's only one this time, which is Planning Appeals Received. It's agenda item 6 on page 95. Mr. Howlett, is there any update on that one that you have?
No, just to say, well, certainly no update in terms of the appeal process, but just some...
Could you turn the mic on a bit more towards Stuart?
Sorry, thank you. No update in terms of the appeal process at the moment. It's obviously going through its due course, but just so members know, it's a delegated decision refused on amenity grounds, effectively taking down some garages and putting up a couple of flats. Impact was on the occupiers or potential occupiers of the flats themselves, because it's very close to the boundary, so there's very little outlook, but also impact on neighbouring properties as well. So the grounds that we've refused it on are amenity grounds, so those will be tested through the obviously the appeal process. And then the second one, which is 8 Spaxton Road at Durley, which was just the erection of a single-storey extension. That's quite an interesting one. Well, I say interesting, that's not extent, let's not overblow it. It's quite interesting, the fact we granted planning consent, but the appeal is against the condition we imposed. It involved a balcony. We granted it subject to some screening on one element to protect the front gardens of a neighbouring property, and they are appealing that condition. So that can happen sometimes. We can grant planning consent, and people can appeal a condition, so it's not just a refusal, people can appeal. So, like I say, probably overstretching the mark by saying interesting, but different to the normal update.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members on the report? No, in which case, Ms. Howell, I think we're going to do a briefing, but if we conclude this morning's business, and then if members can just bear with us for a moment, so we'll close the meeting for this morning. Make a start to this afternoon's business. Can I welcome you to the Development Committee? I'm Councillor Filmer, I'm Chairman of the committee. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting in that the committee members of the Development Committee are present in the canal side at Bridgewater, and other members will be taking place part from outside of the meeting through Teams. It's just to make clear that only members who are present in the room can actually be involved in the debate and in the vote. Can I request that all participants, whether they're in the meeting room or online, if you can make sure if you've got a mobile phone, please make sure that's turned to silent or turned off. And can I also just remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. The format of the meeting will be as per the agenda published, and a copy of the officers' presentations can be found on the committee web pages for those who are viewing online if they wish to. Each application will be taken in turn. The officers will outline the application, followed by a public speaking time where we have registered members of the public speaking. And I don't believe, let me just double check. No, I don't believe we have any registered speakers this afternoon, so I won't bother going through the public speaking time bit. For members of the committee, just to remind you, we are working in the room, so if you want to speak, please indicate by putting your hand up in the room rather than doing anything on the keyboard or the electric hand. So please, we'll deal with that as we would normally in a normal meeting. Once we've had the presentation from the officers, there will then be the debate amongst members, and we'll then take a vote on those, either for, against, or members can abstain if they wish to. Once they have voted, the votes will then be counted and we'll announce the result. Also, just to outline, in the room with us, we also have to my right in the room our officers from the Democratic Services section and also from our legal team, and to my left are our officers from the planning section, and also online we have officers who will be presenting their reports as well. If we can then, members, we'll move on to the agenda itself. The first item we have for this afternoon is apologies for absence. Mrs Nicholson, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Bolt and Councillor Facey for this afternoon session. Thank
you very much, and all other members are present. Item 2 is the urgent business. There is no urgent business this afternoon that isn't already covered by our agenda. As I say, item 3 would be public speaking time, but we don't actually have any members of the public registered to speak this afternoon. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations? Councillor Evans.
Page 89 is in my ward, and I'm also a member of North Petherton Town Council. I've taken no part in any discussions relating to this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just for members of the public who are present online, it's important that you have a background if members have any involvement in a planning application prior to today's meeting. We have a standing order within this committee, which is that members can get involved at the town and parish council level, or they can get involved at this committee. They can't do both. The reason is that there would be a concern that if they've already made a decision or been involved in a decision at the town and parish level, it might be perceived that they've already made their mind up before they come to this meeting and they would have predetermined an application. So that's where you've just heard the declaration that a member has not been involved at that stage, so that he can come to this meeting unfettered by any further discussions that may have taken place earlier. Right, members, that brings us then to the planning applications themselves. We have a series of applications relating to Cannington, and I'll let Mrs Parsons introduce those so that we can understand how that will be dealt with today. So again, over to you, Shanta. Just to remind you, if you can sort of count yourself in, because we need to switch over the microphones from within this room to being online. So over to you. Thank you.
Right, now I can begin. We've got 6 planning applications at Blackmore Farm, and I'll present them all together, and then the vote will be taken separately. Blackmore Farm is an established farm off of Blackmore Lane, and all of these applications are for agricultural buildings. One is to cover an existing slurry pit, the other is to cover an open cattle yard, and then there are 4 applications for agricultural buildings to cover existing silage pits. Now, the site is located at Blackmore Farm, which is off of Blackmore Lane and to the southwest of the village of Cannington. It's a well-established farm holding. There, the aerial shows the Blackmore Lane running to the north and to the east there, and the collection of farm buildings. Further to the north, you can see some of the more traditional farm buildings, and these are accessed from an access further to the north. This aerial shows the siting of the proposed applications for the buildings outlined in red. Other than this building here, that's a consent that's already been granted to cover an existing manure store. So we're looking at 6 applications. Application here to cover an open cattle yard, application here to cover an existing slurry pit, and the 4 applications here to cover existing silage pits. This is a photograph showing the entrance into the site. The second photograph shows the view of the yard looking westwards and then northwards towards some of the traditional buildings. The first application is number 20. This is to cover an existing silage pit. This would be adjacent to an existing livestock building. It would measure 18.17 metres by 5.6 metres and stand at a height of 4.27 metres. The photographs show with the arrows the location of the existing slurry pit, and the building would be on site of that. It would have a green box profile sheeted roof and sides with an open-ended section on the south elevation. Now, the second building that I'm going to present is number 24. This is an agricultural building to cover an open cattle yard. As you can see, it's located centrally within the site. It would measure 23.46 metres by 12.19 metres and stand at a height of 5.56 metres. These photographs show the location of the area where the proposed building would be sited. It would have a green box profile sheeted roof with Perspex roof lights. Now, applications numbers 25, 26, 27 and 28 are all for structures to cover existing silage pits. There are 4 in a row, and this is where number 4 is located. These are the 4 pits. Again, this is where number 4 is located. It is outlined in red. It is immediately adjacent to the existing farm building to the west. It would measure 36.57 metres by 10.66 metres. It stands at a height of 9.32 metres. All of the silage pit covers would be the same height, as you can see, and similar widths, although pit number 1 would vary slightly in length, being 48.77 metres. And this slide shows pit number 3, and as you can see, the 4 pits are all in line, and they all look similar you can see in the slide showing the elevations. I'm going to go back to slide 3 or slide 5 on the PowerPoint. Now, the proposed structures would stand within the existing collection of farm buildings. It's considered that they would be of an appropriate form for the use and the area, and as such the buildings are not considered to have any adverse impact on the character of the area. The recommendation is to grant consent for all 6 applications. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions, please? None at all. Yes, Councillor Scott, thank you.
Yes, this is required because of the environmental things that are happening, and with climate change it's expected to get hotter. I can see it will be a benefit to this farm, and therefore propose to meet recommendations.
Thank you. What I'll do, Councillor Scott, is I'll come to you for each one in turn, if that's all right, depending on what happens with the debate. Yes, Councillor Betty.
I will happily second that recommendation.
Again, I'll be back to you in just a while. Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm happy to support these applications. I just have one question, which is I understand that there is a Grade 1 listed heritage asset in the vicinity of these locations, which isn't mentioned in the reports, and I just wanted to check that the officer was 100% satisfied that there'll be no impact. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer that question.
Yeah.
That's okay, Chairman. So,
Mr. Howlett.
because I raised the very point when I saw the draft report, and the officer happy that they're far enough away. There's obviously quite a few modern buildings in between the Grade 1 listed buildings, so yes.
Councillor Kingham.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, they're covering over the various pits, etc., to alleviate rain going into those pits. But obviously, you still have rainwater to disperse off. By what means has the surface water been dealt with?
Thank you. Mr. Howlett, are you able to answer that? Or
I can't, I'm afraid,
okay.
so that will be, we will have to count Shantou.
Miss Parsons will have to count you in if that's all right, but we'll switch over to you to come back on that if we can. So if you again count yourself in, maybe 5 this time would be probably good enough. I think Shantou.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Can you hear me already? I can start. I would have to go back to the application to give you the details of how the drainage is to be dealt with. But the applicant, with all the applications, has submitted information in terms of the surface water, and that it will be dealt with accordingly. But I mean, I'd have to come back just to double check on the submission on the application in order to feedback that, because I haven't got the file in front of me. If members are happy for me to do that.
The whole point of this, as I understand it, is that this water is being kept separate, so it must be being dealt with.
I think Councillor King's point is that by keeping it separate, you're putting it somewhere else, aren't you? I think is the point. I mean, it is, you know, these are extensions effectively of existing buildings, which I'm sure will then tap into the existing surface water system that's on the site. I mean, in terms of proportion, it's quite a small proportion of additional buildings. The information that would have came forward as part of the planning application clearly hasn't caused any concerns from any consultees or anything, so we wouldn't normally condition it unless there was a requirement to condition it. So I think generally, given the nature of the development, we probably think it's probably okay without any specific condition. Yeah.
Any further comments or questions from members? If not, as we will have to, as I say, address these one at a time. So we did have I'll just confirm, Councillor Scott and Councillor Betty, that you're happy to move the recommendation for the first application, which is on page 62, I think the recommendation is, which is to grant permission. That's for the application number 132120. So is that proposed and seconded? Yeah. All those in favour of granting permission, please show. Okay, so we then move on to the application number 132124. Again, Councillors Scott and Betty, you're happy to propose and second? Okay, all those in favour, please show. That again unanimous, clearly carried. So we then move on to the next application, which is 132125. We have a proposer, Councillor Scott, seconded Councillor Betty. All those in favour, please show. That again is unanimous. You're happy with that? Okay. So over the pages to the next application, which was 132126. We have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour of granting permission, please show. That again is unanimous. And over to 132127. We have a proposer and seconder, and those in favour, please show. That again is clearly carried unanimously. Permission granted for that. And we're then on to 132128. Again, Councillor Scott, Councillor Betty propose and seconding. All those in favour, please show. Again, unanimously carried. And better not go on to the next one because we haven't got that application yet. So that is all of those permissions granted unanimously. So that is Cannington's application dealt with. We then move to the next application on your agenda, which is North Petherton. And again, Ms. Parsons, if you can introduce this one, and again, if you can count yourself in, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll count myself in 10, 9, 8. Thank you. I'll just share my screen. I can see that you can see that. So this is an application for the change of use of former farmyard to residential garden, together with the erection of an ancillary building to house a swimming pool on the site of an existing Dutch barn, which is to be demolished. The site is at Littlemore Drove, Fordgate. As you can see, it is located within the hamlet of Fordgate and to the south of the Fordgate hamlet there. The site comprises of a converted barn, now a dwelling, with a garden area attached to the side. The converted barn area is here with the garden area attached, together with an agricultural yard to the south, where there is an existing Dutch barn located along the western boundary, adjacent to a ditch which runs along here. It is proposed to remove the Dutch barn and build a swimming pool in its place. It's also proposed to change the use of the land to the south of the converted barn to be incorporated into the garden area. So the original garden area to be attached to the barn when it was granted to be converted to a dwelling includes this area. And so this application is also to incorporate this area of land to be used as part of the garden. This is a photograph looking towards the western side of the converted barn and also shows the existing Dutch barn to be demolished. This is a view further away from the site from the same angle, and this is from the opposite direction looking westwards, showing the side and frontage of the converted barn. You can't see the Dutch barn from that view. This is looking straight into the site southwards at the end of the converted property, converted barn. Now the converted barn, now a dwelling, is located here, and the Dutch barn that's to be removed is located here adjacent to the ditch. The Dutch barn measures 10 metres by 13 metres and stands at a height of 6 metres. This shows the siting of the proposed pool building. During the processing of the application, the drawings were amended so that the pool building was reduced in size and it was moved further away from the ditch to the west. The building would measure 9.8 metres by 16 metres, which includes an overhang, which you can see on the elevations here. It would stand at a height of 4.55 metres to the ridge and would be finished in cedar cladding with a profile coated steel roof. Within the building, there would be a pool, which would measure 10 metres by 4 metres, with changing rooms, a plant room, and a WC. In terms of the report, my apologies, as the Drainage Board's comments were missed from the consultation response section within the report. They are referred to near the end at main issues. So I've just jumped a slide there. They state that their standing, the Drainage Board state that their standing advice needs to be referred to and recommend a note to applicant advising of the need to apply for land drainage consent where the building is within 9 metres of a watercourse. In terms of the principle of the use of the land to be incorporated within the garden area, the land is currently disused farmyard and lies immediately adjacent to the existing dwelling. It would not appear as a projection into the open countryside, as the existing yard area is separated from the fields, and in terms of size it would appear to be similar to many of the garden areas of other dwellings within Fordgate. The proposed swimming pool would be located on the site of the Dutch barn. It would be finished in appropriate materials and be of a size and scale appropriate for its function and location. It is not considered that the building nor the extended garden area would have any adverse impact on the character of the area. Regarding the potential impact on neighbours, the building would replace the existing Dutch barn. It would be on the western side of the site away from the nearest neighbour, which is Wisteria to the east, and due to its former location it would have no adverse impact on residential amenity. In terms of flooding, the site is within flood zone 3. The flood risk assessment submitted with the application confirms that the finished floor level of the building would be 600 millimetres above ground level, and that it would be constructed using flood resilient techniques. As referred to earlier, the Drainage Board states that land drainage consent may be required. The proposed building would be set approximately 4.5 metres further away from the ditch on the western boundary than the existing Dutch barn. The applicant and agent states that the ditch has historically been maintained from the other side, but they are also aware of the need to apply for consent. To provide biodiversity enhancement, it is recommended that an additional condition is added to the consent if granted, condition number 4, to require the fixings of bat and bird boxes. The exact wording of the condition can be agreed with the Chair and Vice Chair. With the additional condition, the recommendation is to grant consent. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Members, any comments or questions, please? Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions from me. First of all, just assurance that the water from the swimming pool, in light of the Town Council's comments, is secure away from any of the water in this level. I know it's slightly oxymoronic, protecting a swimming pool from flooding, but it does seem a slightly strange situation. The second is, I notice on the plan that there appears to be some structures towards the rear of the property that would be in the newly extended garden area. I wondered what those buildings were.
Okay, Ms Parsons, if I can come to you on that.
Yeah. Okay, 10, 9, 8. Okay, thank you. The buildings to the south of the plot, they're existing agricultural sheds, basically, that were or are still there historically from when the site was a farm. With regard to the swimming pool emptying, within the paragraph and section on impact on flood risk on the report, we raised the question in terms of what happens to the water if it has to be emptied, and that was an issue raised by Natural England initially. The applicant states that with proper maintenance, there's no requirement to empty the pool. The pool manufacturer advised that in the unlikely event that the pool needs to be emptied, the applicants would need to call in a specialist tanker and pump it out under a licence. That's as far as I'm aware with regard to the emptying of the pool. I'm not sure if that does answer Councillor Evans' question.
Yeah, I think it answers the point that was raised by the Town Council. I just wanted to reassure myself of that point. On the subject of the buildings, is there any change to whether those buildings could be used for alternative use by them now being part of a residential garden rather than a redundant farmyard?
Mr. Howlett,
it sounds, and Shanta can confirm if I'm wrong, it sounds like they're just more sort of ancillary agricultural sheds, so they will just form a part of the ancillary use of that garden area effectively.
But I think the question was, by making it garden area, does that give them any easier transition to something else than if they were
No.
Okay.
It's still the planning permission unless they, if they're going to turn them into dwellings or anything like that, well, they certainly need planning permission. They would just form ancillary buildings within a garden area as opposed to ancillary buildings in a field.
Okay, thanks for that clarification and reassurance. And with that, I'm happy to propose a recommendation.
And just to confirm, that's with the additional condition about the bat and bird boxes?
Most definitely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hendry?
Actually, second, Councillor Bill Revens. I think it's very good. Thank you. Now.
Permission with the additional condition. All those in favour, please indicate. That would appear unanimous. That is clearly carried, so permission is granted. Thank you very much. Members, I believe that brings us to the end of our business for today. If there's nothing else, Mr. Howlett, that you... No. Thank you all very much for your participation in today's meeting and also for bearing with us with the slight technical issues we've had at various points. So thank you very much, and we'll close the meeting. Thank you.